At the maternity ward, my daughter asked me not to touch the baby. You didn't even know how to take care of me. When I told her the story of her birth, she begged for my forgiveness. Your presence here means so much to me. Watch until the end and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached. You didn't know how to take care of me. Don't touch my baby. Those words cut deeper than any knife could. I stood there frozen, the small teddy bear clutched in my trembling hands as my daughter Claire glared at me from her hospital bed. 35 years old, her face flushed with the glow of new motherhood, yet hardened with a resentment that had been building for decades. Claire, please, I whispered, my voice breaking. I just want to meet my grandson. No, Mom. Her voice was firm, unwavering. I don't want you near him. Her husband Jake shifted uncomfortably beside her, avoiding my eyes. He'd always been polite to me, but his loyalty belonged to Claire. The tiny bundle in her arms squirmed, and she adjusted the blue blanket, shielding him from my view. I think it's best if you leave, Gail, Jake finally said, his tone gentle but leaving no room for argument. The nurse who had guided me to the maternity room looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Perhaps we could try again later, she suggested kindly, already ushering me toward the door. I nodded numbly, placing the teddy bear on the side table. I'll leave this here. For when you're ready. Claire didn't respond. She just turned away, focusing all her attention on her newborn son. My grandson, whom I wasn't allowed to touch or even see properly. The walk back to the parking lot felt endless. Each step heavier than the last, my mind replaying Claire's words over and over again. You didn't know how to take care of me. Was she right? Had I failed her so completely? By the time I reached my car, tears were streaming down my face. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, I gripped the steering wheel and let the sobs come. Deep, painful sobs that shook my entire body. I thought I'd prepared myself for rejection. Claire and I had been distant for years, our relationship reduced to obligatory holiday phone calls and occasional stilted dinners. But this was different. This was Claire making sure I wouldn't be part of her son's life the way I'd been absent from hers. Or at least, the way she believed I'd been absent. Memories flooded back, unbidden and sharp. Claire at 5, crying at her kindergarten graduation because I was late, having rushed over straight from my night shift. Claire at 12, refusing to invite me to her piano recital after I'd missed the previous one. Claire at 16, screaming that I didn't care about her, that I never had. Each memory was a fresh wound, reopening scars I thought had long since healed. I started the car but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I found myself staring at the hospital entrance, wondering if I should go back in. Fight harder. Try to make her understand. But what would I say? The truth was too complicated, too painful. Some burdens weren't meant to be shared, especially not with your children. The drive home was a blur. Muscle memory guided me through familiar streets while my mind remained trapped in that hospital room, replaying Claire's cold eyes, her harsh words. My small apartment felt emptier than usual when I finally arrived. I'd decorated the spare room in anticipation of babysitting my grandchild, filled it with books and toys and a small crib I'd found secondhand. All wasted now. I sank onto my couch, exhaustion washing over me. The photo album on my coffee table caught my eye, the one I'd recently put together, filled with pictures of Claire growing up. I'd planned to show it to her, to remind her that despite everything, I'd been there. I'd tried. As I flipped through the pages, lingering on a photo of 4-year-old Claire sitting on my lap, her smile revealing missing front teeth, I realized something. Claire didn't know the truth. She'd never known it. She only knew what she'd experienced, a mother who worked too much, who sometimes missed important moments, who was often too tired to play. She didn't know about the bruises I'd hidden beneath long sleeves. She didn't know about the nights I'd spent terrified in my own bedroom. She didn't know that every extra shift I took was one more step toward freedom, for both of us. How could she? I'd never told her. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I'd protected Claire from the ugliest parts of our past, believing it was the right thing to do. I never wanted her to know what kind of man her father really was. But in shielding her, I'd allowed her to believe a different story, one where I was simply a neglectful mother who didn't care enough. Maybe it was time for the truth. Maybe it was the only way to heal the chasm between us. With hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I reached for pen and paper. "Dear Claire," I began, tears blurring my vision. "There's something you need to know about the day you were born." The paper trembled in my hands as I wrote, each word a burden lifting from my shoulders after 35 years of silence. "Dear Claire, there's something you need to know about the day you were born." I stared at those words for a long time before continuing. How do you begin to tell your daughter that her birth, the happiest day of your life, was also one of the most terrifying? You came into this world on a stormy Tuesday. The hospital was short-staffed, and your father wasn't there. He'd gone out drinking the night before and hadn't come home. The nurses were kind, but I was alone when I first held you, this perfect, tiny person with a dusting of blonde hair and eyes so blue they didn't seem real. When your father finally arrived, he wasn't happy. He'd wanted a boy. My hands shook harder as the memories flooded back. Robert storming into the hospital room, reeking of alcohol and rage. The way the nurse had given him a wary look before leaving us alone. His first words upon seeing his daughter, "You couldn't even give me a son?" I'd made excuses for him for years. He was under pressure at work. He'd had a difficult childhood. He was a good provider, even if he wasn't always a good husband. Lies I told myself to survive. I developed what they now call postpartum depression, though back then, it didn't have a name. I just knew I felt hollow and terrified. Terrified of not being a good enough mother. Terrified of your father's unpredictable moods. Terrified of doing everything wrong. I set down my pen, overwhelmed by the weight of these confessions. The clock on my wall read 2:17 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and slid a key into the lock of my jewelry box, the only thing I kept locked in my home. Inside, beneath tangled necklaces and mismatched earrings, was a small envelope yellowed with age. I hadn't looked at its contents in over 20 years, but I'd never been able to throw it away. Evidence, a therapist had once called it. Not just for potential legal action, but for myself, proof that I wasn't crazy, that it had all really happened. I returned to the kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 5 faded Polaroid photographs, taken with shaking hands using the camera's self-timer. Bruises around my neck. A split lip. A swollen eye. The last one showed my back, crisscrossed with welts from Robert's belt. All taken during the first 3 years of Claire's life. I set them beside my half-written letter and continued writing. Your father wasn't the man you think you remember. The loving dad who took you fishing and helped with your science projects, that was only one side of him. The side he wanted you to see. The other side, the one I protected you from, was violent and cruel. The first time he hit me was 3 months before our wedding. I convinced myself it was a one-time mistake. By the time I realized it wasn't, we were already married, and I was pregnant with you. My tears smudged the ink, but I kept writing. After 35 years of silence, the truth demanded to be told. I stayed because I thought a child needed her father. I stayed because he threatened to take you away if I tried to leave, and with his family's connections in this town, he could have. I stayed because I had nowhere to go, no money of my own, and my parents were dead. I stayed because I was afraid. The memories came faster now, things I'd buried deep but never forgotten. Do you remember how I always worked night shifts when you were young? It wasn't just for the higher pay. It was because your father was usually home in the evenings, and that meant you weren't alone with him. I arranged my life around keeping you safe. I paused, remembering Claire as a little girl, crying because I couldn't attend her daytime school events. How she'd stopped asking by 3rd grade, already resigned to my absence. The business trips when your father disappeared for days? Those weren't business trips, Claire. Those were the times he'd beaten me so badly I feared for my life, and he'd leave until the worst of my injuries healed. The accidents that left me with broken bones and hospital stays? They weren't accidents. I took a deep breath, staring at the photographs spread before me. Evidence. Proof. Shame. When you were 7, I finally gathered the courage to leave. I packed our bags while your father was at work, withdrew the small amount of money I'd managed to hide from him over the years, and called a women's shelter in the next county. They had a spot for us. They would help us disappear. But when I went to pick you up from school, you weren't there. Your father had already taken you. He left a message with the school secretary. Tell Gail if she wants to see her daughter again, she'll be home when I get there. I unpacked our bags and put everything back exactly as it had been. When you came home that night, excited about the ice cream your dad had bought you, you never knew how close we'd come to escaping. Or what it cost me to stay. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The truth was exhausting, but now that I'd started, I couldn't stop. I kept working as many shifts as they'd give me, saving whatever I could without your father noticing. Planning for a day when you'd be old enough that he couldn't use you to control me anymore. The day you turned 18, I finally left. You were already in college by then, already pulling away from me, already believing I was the cold, distant mother who chose work over her child. You didn't know I'd been fighting for both of us all along. I slid the photographs back into their envelope, unable to look at them any longer. Dawn was breaking outside my kitchen window, pale light seeping through the blinds. I'd been writing all night, pages and pages of truth I'd never spoken. I'm not sharing this to make you feel guilty, or to excuse my failures as a mother. I know I wasn't perfect. I know there were times when you needed me and I wasn't there, physically or emotionally. Depression and trauma took parts of me I've never fully recovered. But I need you to know I loved you, every single day. Everything I did, every missed school play, every extra shift, every time I seemed distant or preoccupied, was to keep us both alive until we could be free. I hope someday you can understand. I hope someday you'll let me be part of your son's life, and yours. With all my love, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope along with one photograph, the one that showed my face, bruised but determined. Then I sealed it, wrote Claire's name on the front, and set it on the counter. Tomorrow, I would take it to the hospital. Whether she would read it, whether she would believe it, whether it would heal the rift between us or widen it beyond repair, I couldn't know. But at least, finally, the truth would be told. The hospital corridor seemed longer than it had yesterday. Each step required deliberate effort, the sealed envelope in my purse weighing me down like a stone. I'd barely slept after finishing the letter, my mind swinging between certainty and doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Would exposing these old wounds help Claire understand, or would it only hurt her more? I paused outside the maternity ward, my reflection ghostly in the glass doors. An aging woman with tired eyes and silver-streaked hair. When had I gotten so old? Had the years of silence and survival etched themselves so deeply into my face? Can I help you? A young nurse approached, her cheerful smile faltering slightly as she noted my hesitation. I'm here to see my daughter, Claire Reynolds. She had a baby boy yesterday. Recognition flashed in the nurse's eyes. She'd probably witnessed our confrontation the day before. Let me check if she's receiving visitors. I waited, clutching my purse, half hoping Claire would refuse to see me. Then I could delay this moment, tell myself I'd tried. The coward's way out. The nurse returned with an apologetic smile. Mrs. Reynolds is resting now. The baby had a fussy night, and they've just gotten to sleep. Relief and disappointment collided within me. I understand. Could you? I pulled the envelope from my purse, my fingers reluctant to release it. Could you give this to her when she wakes up? It's important. The nurse nodded, taking the envelope carefully. I'll make sure she gets it. Thank you. I turned to leave, then stopped. Actually, what's his name? My grandson. Her expression softened. Thomas. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. Healthy and beautiful. Thomas. My grandson had a name. An identity. A life I might never be part of. Thank you, I whispered again, blinking back tears as I made my way back through the corridor. Outside, the September air had a crisp edge, autumn announcing its arrival after a stifling summer. I sat on a bench in the hospital garden, unable to bring myself to leave yet somehow equally unable to stay. In this limbo, suspended between past and future, I found myself praying to a God I wasn't sure I still believed in. Please let her understand. Please don't let my truth hurt her more than my silence already has. My cell phone remained silent, its screen dark. I hadn't really expected Claire to call immediately after reading the letter, but some foolish part of me had hoped. After an hour, I finally stood up, my joints stiff from sitting in the cool air, and headed to my car. At home, the emptiness greeted me like an old friend. I moved through the rooms restlessly, straightening items that didn't need straightening, washing dishes that were already clean. Anything to keep my hands busy, to prevent myself from staring at the phone. Eventually, I found myself in the spare bedroom, the room I'd prepared for a grandchild I might never know. The pale yellow walls, the small bookshelf filled with children's books, the rocking chair by the window. All my hopes condensed into a 10 by 12 space. On an impulse, I opened the closet and pulled out the old photo albums I'd stored there. Not the carefully curated one I'd recently assembled, but the real ones. The ones with the unfiltered truth of our lives. The first album began with Claire's birth. Me in the hospital bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding my newborn daughter. Robert wasn't in any of the early pictures. He'd refused to be photographed, claiming he looked terrible after staying up all night. Another lie. He hadn't been there. I turned the pages slowly. Claire's first smile. Her first steps. Her first day of kindergarten. In many photos, I looked tired, dark circles under my eyes betraying the night shifts and constant vigilance. But there was love there too. In the way I looked at her. In the birthday cakes I'd stayed up all night to bake. In the Halloween costumes I'd sewn by hand. Had Claire ever seen these pictures? Really seen them? Or had she only remembered the times I wasn't there? A photo from her 7th birthday caught my eye. Claire at the kitchen table, beaming in front of a homemade cake shaped like a castle, complete with ice cream cone turrets and moat made of blue frosting. I remembered staying up until 3 a.m. to finish it, determined to give her the princess party she'd wanted. What the photo didn't show was the fight that had happened just hours before. Robert, drunk and furious that I'd spent money on party decorations. The bruises on my ribs, hidden beneath a cheerful floral blouse. The way I'd winced every time I leaned down to hug one of Claire's friends. I closed the album, unable to look anymore. The contrast between what Claire had seen, a mother who managed to be there for birthdays but missed school plays, and what I'd lived through was too stark. How could I have expected her to understand when I'd worked so hard to hide the truth? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. My heart leaped to my throat as I fumbled to answer it. Hello? Gail? It's Martha from next door. Just checking to see how the new grandbaby is doing. I swallowed my disappointment. He's beautiful, Martha. They named him Thomas. Wonderful. You must be over the moon. When do you get to babysit? The innocent question pierced like a knife. We're still working out the details, I managed to say. Claire's recovering, and I don't want to impose. After making vague promises to show Martha pictures soon, I ended the call and set my phone down with trembling hands. The house felt even emptier now, the silence more oppressive. I returned to the kitchen, made myself tea I didn't want, and waited. For what, I wasn't entirely sure. Redemption? Understanding? Forgiveness? The sky outside darkened as afternoon faded into evening. Still no call from Claire. I imagined the letter sitting unopened on her hospital nightstand, or worse, torn to pieces and discarded. I was about to force myself to eat something when my phone finally rang again. This time, Claire's name flashed on the screen. My hand shook so badly I almost couldn't answer. "Hello?" Her voice came through, thick with tears. "Mom? We need to talk. Now." The drive back to the hospital passed in a blur. Claire's tear-filled voice echoed in my mind with each mile. "We need to talk. Now." Not angry, as I'd feared, but broken. Shattered. As if the foundation she'd built her life upon had suddenly crumbled beneath her feet. Which, in a way, it had. The maternity ward was quieter in the evening. A different nurse led me to Claire's room, her expression carefully neutral. "She's been upset," the nurse murmured, pausing outside the door. "Try to keep things calm, for both her sake and the baby's." I nodded, my throat too dry for words. Claire was sitting up in bed, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. The letter lay open on her lap, the photograph face down beside it. Thomas slept peacefully in the bassinet next to her bed, oblivious to the decades of pain being unearthed around him. "Claire," I said softly, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. She looked up, her expression so raw and vulnerable it took my breath away. "Is it true?" she whispered. "All of it?" "Yes." There was no point in softening it now. "All of it." "Dad, he really..." She couldn't finish the sentence, her hand drifting to the photograph without turning it over, as if even looking at it again would be too much. "Yes." I stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind me. For almost 11 years. Claire's shoulders began to shake, silent tears streaming down her face. I moved toward her, hesitant, uncertain if my comfort would be welcome. But when I reached the bed, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Why didn't you tell me?" "All those years," I thought, a sob cut off her words. "I thought you didn't want to be around me. I thought your work was more important. I thought..." "I know what you thought," I said gently, easing myself onto the edge of her bed. "That's on me. I made the choice not to tell you, to protect you from knowing what kind of man your father really was." "Protect me?" Claire's voice rose slightly, causing Thomas to stir. She immediately lowered it again. "How was letting me believe you were cold and distant protecting me?" I sighed, the weight of 25 years of justifications and second guesses pressing down on me. "I thought knowing the truth would hurt you more. Your father, when he wasn't angry, when he wasn't drinking, he could be charming. Loving, even. He adored you in his way. I didn't want to take that from you. But you let me hate you instead." It wasn't a question, but a realization, her eyes widening with the dawning horror of it. "I could handle your anger," I said simply. "I couldn't handle the thought of you being as afraid as I was." Claire shook her head, fresh tears spilling. "All those times he told me you were working because you didn't want to be home with us, all those times he said I was a burden to you. None of that was true," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. "I worked to support us, yes, but also to save enough that we could eventually leave. And to minimize the time you had to spend alone with him." "But I was alone with him all the time," Claire whispered, a new fear creeping into her voice. "When you were at work. I felt sick. Did he ever hurt you?" The question I'd always been too afraid to ask directly, though I'd watched carefully for signs over the years. "No, not physically," Claire said after a moment. "But he would tell me stories about you. How you never wanted children. How you blamed me for trapping you in a marriage you didn't want. How much happier we'd both be if you were gone." Each word was a knife. The insidious poison Robert had dripped into our daughter's ears, the deliberate campaign to turn her against me, it was worse than I'd imagined. And I'd never seen it, too focused on the threat of physical harm to recognize the emotional damage he was inflicting. "None of that was true," I repeated, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. You were the reason I got up every morning. The reason I survived." A sound from the bassinet drew our attention. Thomas was awake, his tiny face scrunched up as he began to fuss. Claire reached for him automatically, lifting him into her arms with practiced ease despite having been a mother for less than 48 hours. "I need to feed him," she said, adjusting her hospital gown. "I can leave," I offered, starting to stand. "No." Claire's voice was unexpectedly firm. "Stay. Please." I settled back, watching in wonder as my daughter nursed my grandson. The cycle of life continuing, despite all our broken places. "When Dad died last year," Claire said after a while, her eyes fixed on Thomas, "I was so angry that you didn't come to the funeral. I told Jake it was proof you'd never cared about our family. That you were selfish." She looked up, anguish plain on her face. "But you weren't grieving, were you? You were finally free." "I sent flowers," I said quietly. "But no, I couldn't bring myself to stand there and listen to people eulogize the man who nearly destroyed me. Who turned my own daughter against me. I'm sorry if that hurt you." "No, I'm sorry," Claire whispered. "I'm sorry I believed him. I'm sorry I blamed you for everything. I'm sorry about yesterday, what I said." "You didn't know," I assured her. "How could you? I never gave you the chance to understand." Thomas had finished nursing. Claire adjusted her gown and shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back with gentle confidence. "Jake doesn't know any of this," she said after a moment. "About Dad, I mean. I always told him Dad was this amazing father who set the bar impossibly high." Her laugh was bitter. "I've been comparing Jake to a fantasy all this time, making him feel inadequate for not measuring up to the loving father I thought I had." "You can tell him the truth now," I suggested. "If you want to." Claire nodded, then hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "That last night, before you left. When I was 18 and leaving for college." She shifted Thomas to her other shoulder, her movements gentle but her eyes troubled. "You and Dad had a huge fight. I came downstairs and there was broken glass everywhere, and you were bleeding. Dad said you'd thrown a vase at him." I closed my eyes, the memory still vivid after all these years. "He smashed my car headlights so I couldn't drive you to college the next day. Said if I couldn't even see my own daughter off, what kind of mother was I?" When I confronted him, he pushed me into the china cabinet. Claire's breath caught. I believed him. Even though I'd never once seen you violent, I believed him without question. "That's what abusers do," I said softly. "They make you doubt what's right in front of you." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound Thomas's contented gurgles as he drifted back towards sleep. "I don't know how to process all this," Claire finally admitted. "It's like my entire childhood was a lie." "Not all of it," I corrected her. "Not the love. Not the good moments we had together. Those were real." She nodded slowly. "Would you?" She looked down at Thomas, then back at me. "Would you like to hold him?" My heart stuttered. "Are you sure?" In answer, she gently transferred Thomas into my arms. He was warm and solid, his tiny face relaxed in sleep, one small hand curled against his cheek. My grandson. My flesh and blood. "Hello, Thomas," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "I'm your grandma." Claire watched us, her own eyes wet. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For yesterday. For everything." "I'm sorry too," I told her, unable to look away from Thomas's perfect face. "But maybe now we can start over. All of us." Claire reached out, placing her hand over mine where it cradled Thomas's tiny body. A bridge, beginning to form across the chasm of misunderstanding that had separated us for too long. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." 3 days later, I stood in my kitchen arranging blueberry muffins on a plate, my hands trembling slightly with anticipation. Claire and Thomas were coming home from the hospital today, and though they were going to their own house with Jake, Claire had asked if they could stop by first. "Just for an hour or so," she'd said. "I want Thomas to see where his grandma lives." Those words, his grandma, had echoed in my mind ever since, filling empty spaces I hadn't realized existed. The knock came at precisely 11, 3 gentle taps that sent my heart racing. I smoothed my hair, checked my reflection in the microwave door, and went to answer it. Claire stood on my doorstep, Thomas bundled against her chest in a blue wrap. Jake hovered behind them, looking slightly uncomfortable but offering a polite smile. "Hi, Mom," Claire said, the words still sounding tentative on her lips after years of cold, Gail's or no direct address at all. Come in," I ushered them inside, resisting the urge to reach immediately for the baby. "I made muffins, and there's coffee, or tea if you prefer." Jake relaxed slightly at the mention of coffee. "Coffee would be great, thanks." We settled in the living room, Claire carefully unwrapping Thomas from his cocoon. "Do you want to hold him while I fix my coffee?" The casualness of the offer nearly undid me. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as she transferred him into my arms. Thomas was even more beautiful than I remembered from the hospital, his features more defined, his eyes, Claire's eyes, gazing up at me with solemn curiosity. "Hello again, little one," I murmured, gently rocking him. "Do you remember your grandma?" Claire returned with 2 mugs, handing one to Jake, who had been surveying my living room with polite interest. "You've done a lot with the place since I was last here," he commented, gesturing to the bright throw pillows and framed photographs that had replaced the more subdued decor of my previous visits. I nodded, still captivated by Thomas. I needed a change. Something cheerful. Claire sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, a proximity we hadn't shared in years. "Jake, Mom has something to tell you. About my father." Jake's expression grew serious. "Your letter? You read it?" I looked up, surprised. "Claire showed it to me last night." He hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "It's in the past," I said automatically, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. The past had shaped everything, Claire's mistrust, my isolation, the years we'd lost. Jake set his mug down, leaning forward. "It's not just in the past, though, is it? I've watched Claire struggle with anxiety our entire relationship. I've seen how she apologizes constantly for things that aren't her fault. How she panics if she thinks she's disappointed someone." His voice grew firmer. "That's not in the past. That's still happening." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I never made the connection," she admitted. "I just thought I was high-strung, or overly sensitive." "You learned early that disappointing people, especially your father, had consequences," I said gently. "Even if he never physically hurt you, you saw what happened to me when I didn't meet his expectations." The room grew quiet, the weight of this realization settling over us. Thomas squirmed in my arms, breaking the tension with a soft coo that drew all our attention. "I've been having nightmares," Claire finally said, her gaze fixed on her son. "Since the hospital. Since reading your letter. I keep dreaming about those times I remember you being hurt, the accidents you claimed. But now I see them for what they really were." My breath caught. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to give you new traumas." "No," Claire shook her head firmly. "I needed to know. I hate that I never saw it. That I never helped you. You were a child," I reminded her. "It wasn't your job to help me or to see through the lies. It was my job to protect you, and that's what I tried to do." Jake cleared his throat. "Claire's been talking about therapy," he said, glancing at my daughter for permission to continue. When she nodded, he went on. "For both of us, actually. To work through some of this. To make sure we don't." He struggled for words. "To make sure we break the cycle," Claire finished for him. "So Thomas never experiences anything like what either of us did." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's very wise. Would you?" Claire hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you consider coming with me? For some sessions?" There's so much we still haven't talked about, and I think having someone guide us might help. The request was unexpected, but its significance wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just about healing old wounds, it was about building something new. Something stronger. I'd be honored, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that: Thomas's nursing schedule, the meals friends had dropped off at their house, the seemingly endless stream of baby gifts that kept arriving. Normal, everyday concerns of new parents, shared with a grandmother who was being welcomed into their lives. As Jake excused himself to use the restroom, Claire leaned closer, lowering her voice. There's something else I wanted to tell you. Something I haven't even told Jake yet. My heart rate quickened with concern. What is it? I've been having these moments since Thomas was born. She struggled to find the words. Like, flashes of how it must have been for you. With me. Alone, scared, trying to figure everything out while also trying to stay safe. I nodded, unable to speak. The thing is, Claire continued, my situation is completely different. Jake is nothing like Dad. He's patient and kind and supportive. We have financial stability. I have friends nearby who've offered help. But even with all that, there are moments when I feel completely overwhelmed. Terrified I'll do something wrong. That I'm not good enough to be his mother. That's normal, I assured her. All new mothers feel that way. Maybe, Claire acknowledged. But it's made me realize how incredibly strong you must have been. To do it all alone, under the circumstances you were in. Her eyes met mine, tears threatening to spill over. I'm in awe of you, Mom. And I'm so sorry I ever thought you didn't love me enough. The words were like a balm to wounds I'd carried for decades. I shifted Thomas to one arm so I could reach for Claire's hand with the other. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Jake returned, oblivious to the emotional moment he'd interrupted. We should probably get going soon, he said, checking his watch. The nurse said to make sure Thomas gets a good long nap this afternoon. Claire nodded, wiping discreetly at her eyes. Just a few more minutes. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent buzz that startled Thomas into a brief cry. I glanced at Claire, confusion evident on both our faces. Are you expecting someone? She asked. I shook my head, passing Thomas back to her as I stood. I'll see who it is. When I opened the front door, my heart froze. Standing on my porch, looking older but unmistakable, was Robert's brother Michael. Hello, Gail, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. It's been a long time. Michael. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles turning white. What are you doing here? He hadn't changed much in the 15 years since I'd last seen him, at Robert's father's funeral, where he'd cornered me to tell me how I'd ruined his brother's life by leaving. His hair had grayed at the temples, and deeper lines framed his mouth, but the eyes were the same. Robert's eyes. I heard I have a great nephew. His gaze shifted past me, searching for signs of Claire and the baby. Thought I should pay my respects. Who told you? My voice sounded distant, as if coming from someone else. Small town. Word travels. He stepped forward as if to enter, but I held my ground. Aren't you going to invite me in, Gail? For old time's sake. Mom? Who is it? Claire appeared behind me, Thomas cradled protectively against her chest. Michael's face lit up with a predatory smile. Claire. Look at you, all grown up with a baby of your own. I felt Claire stiffen behind me, her breath catching. Jake moved to stand beside her, his expression wary. Uncle Michael, Claire said flatly. What do you want? His smile faltered slightly at her tone. Can't an uncle visit his niece and her new baby? I'm family, after all. No. The word left my mouth before I could consider its implications. You're not welcome here, Michael. His eyes hardened, the familiar flare of anger so reminiscent of his brother that I instinctively took a step back. Still the same bitter woman, I see. poisoning Claire against her family, just like you did with Robert. I think you should leave. Jake's voice was calm but firm as he moved slightly in front of Claire and Thomas. Michael ignored him, focusing on Claire. Did you know your mother kept your father from seeing you after she left? He tried, Claire. He wanted to be part of your life, but she made it impossible. That's not true, I said, finding my voice again. Robert had visitation rights. He chose not to use them. Only because you moved across the county and made it difficult. Stop. Claire's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Just stop. I know the truth now, Uncle Michael. All of it. Michael's expression shifted, confusion replacing anger. What are you talking about? I know what my father did to my mother. I've seen the evidence. Claire stepped forward, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. I know about the abuse. The threats. The manipulation. Michael scoffed, but I could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes. Your mother's been filling your head with lies. No. Claire's voice was stronger now. For years, I believed the lies, that she didn't want me, that she chose work over family, that she was cold and unloving. But those were the lies. Dad's lies. And apparently yours too. Thomas began to fuss, sensing the tension around him. Claire rocked him gently but didn't back down. I don't know why you're here, Uncle Michael, but we don't want you in our lives. She glanced at me, then back at him. Any of us. Now listen here, Michael began, his face flushing. Jake stepped fully in front of Claire now. No, you listen. This is my wife, my son, and my mother-in-law you're upsetting. I'm asking you politely to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Michael looked from Jake to Claire to me, his expression darkening. For a moment, I feared he might become violent, just as Robert would when cornered. But instead, he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You always were good at playing the victim, Gail. Turning everyone against Robert, and now against me. He shook his head. Fine. Have it your way. But remember, Claire, he pointed at her, you've only heard one side of the story. I've heard enough, Claire replied, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. Goodbye, Uncle Michael. I closed the door as he turned to leave, my hand trembling so badly I almost couldn't turn the lock. For a long moment, none of us spoke, the echo of the confrontation hanging in the air between us. Thomas's whimpers escalated into a full cry, breaking the spell. Claire bounced him gently, murmuring soothing words that seemed to calm both of them. I'm sorry, I finally said. I had no idea he would show up here. It's not your fault, Claire assured me, though her face was pale. I just never expected. I mean, I haven't seen him since Dad's funeral. Jake placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? She nodded, but I could see the encounter had shaken her. I just need to sit down for a minute. We moved back to the living room, the cheerful atmosphere from earlier completely evaporated. Claire sat on the couch, focusing on Thomas, while Jake paced by the window, keeping watch in case Michael decided to return. I should have warned you, I said, settling beside Claire. The family resemblance, seeing him must have been a shock. It was like seeing Dad again, Claire admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For a second, I was 10 years old, terrified of saying the wrong thing. The admission broke my heart. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. She looked up, surprised by the endearment I hadn't used since she was small. It's not your fault. It's just, all these years, I thought I'd dealt with everything about Dad. That his death had closed that chapter. But seeing Uncle Michael, hearing him defend Dad like that. She trailed off, shaking her head. It brings it all back, I finished for her. I know. That's how trauma works, it lies dormant until something triggers it. Claire nodded, her gaze returning to Thomas, who had settled against her chest, his eyelids growing heavy. I don't want any of that darkness touching him, she said firmly. Ever. It won't, I promised. We'll make sure of it. All of us, together. Jake rejoined us, apparently satisfied that Michael had truly left. I'm sorry I didn't do more, he said, sitting across from us. I wasn't sure what was happening at first. You did exactly what was needed, Claire assured him, reaching for his hand. You stood with us. The simple statement hung in the air, its significance not lost on any of us. Robert had never stood with me, had always sided with his family against me. Michael had enabled and excused his brother's behavior for years. But here was Jake, choosing Claire and Thomas, and by extension, me, without hesitation. The cycle, finally broken. I think we should go home, Claire said after a moment. It's been a lot. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment that their visit had been cut short. Of course. You need to rest. But maybe, Claire added, meeting my eyes, you could come over tomorrow? Help me figure out this whole nursing schedule thing? Thomas seems to cluster feed in the evenings, and I'm not sure if that's normal or if I'm doing something wrong. Relief and gratitude washed over me. I'd love to. And cluster feeding is completely normal, especially in the early weeks. As they prepared to leave, Claire handed Thomas to me for one last cuddle. I breathed in his sweet baby scent, marveling at how perfectly he fit in my arms. We'll figure it all out, I whispered to him, though my words were meant for Claire too. Day by day. Claire smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I know we will. After they left, I stood in my doorway watching their car disappear down the street. The house felt emptier without them, but not in the hollow, aching way it had before. This emptiness was temporary, a pause between visits rather than an endless void. On my refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a teapot, was the first photo of me with Thomas, taken by Jake just before Michael's unwelcome arrival. My face was alight with joy, my eyes fixed on my grandson as if he were the most precious thing in the world. Because he was. He and Claire both. For decades, I'd carried the weight of choices made in fear and desperation. I protected Claire in the only way I knew how, never realizing that my silence was creating a different kind of harm. I'd lost her, and then found her again, all because of a truth finally spoken. Some scars would always remain. Some wounds would never fully heal. But standing in my kitchen, looking at that photograph, I knew with absolute certainty that the cycle of pain that had defined so much of our lives was finally broken. Not erased, nothing could do that. But transformed into something else. A bridge instead of a barrier. A beginning instead of an end. Thomas would never know the fear that had shadowed his mother's childhood. He would grow up surrounded by love and truth and protection from all sides. Claire would learn that being a mother didn't mean being perfect, it meant being present, being honest, being willing to fight for your child's happiness even when it cost you your own. And I would finally have what I'd always wanted but never quite achieved, a family. Not the broken, frightened trio of my past, but something new. Something stronger. As I made myself a cup of tea and settled into my favorite chair, I realized I was smiling. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, and might never be. But because for the first time in 35 years, I could look toward the future with hope instead of fear. The silence in my home no longer felt like abandonment. Instead, it was peaceful. Expectant. Filled with the promise of tomorrow's visit, and all the days after that. The cycle was broken. And we were free.